No one truly paid attention to the old man with silver hair who sat quietly at the bow of his wooden boat each morning, gently pushing it away from the dock before dawn had a chance to chase away the fog. In a small coastal town in Oregon, where old wooden houses were slowly giving way to million-dollar resorts, Walter Grayson, 74, held onto a corner of the world untouched by anyone: the sea and the Liberty Bell, the wooden boat he had spent 4 years building with his own hands after returning from the Vietnam War. The people of Seaford Bay called him the Old Sailor. A few elders nodded familiarly when he passed by. Others merely glanced past him as if he were a blurred background of the town. Not worth noticing, but not bothersome either. Truth be told, Walter never wanted more than that. His life had long been shaped by quietness, by going unnoticed. No one in Seaford had ever heard him speak of war. No one knew he had cheated death 3 times by mere inches, or that he had once carried a comrade through a hail of bullets back to the deck of a ship. All of that he left at sea every time the Liberty Bell skimmed over the water. The wooden boat, worn, its paint faded, its hull showing patches of wood scarred by salt water, was carved plank by plank with memory. No one knew, but he once told his grandson, Mason, "When my hands touched the grain of the wood, I was building a place memory couldn't chase. At sea, the waves drown out gunfire. On the boat, I'm a survivor, not someone still trapped." Walter had no wife. The woman he loved hadn't waited for him to return from the battlefield. She married someone else, had 3 children, and died of cancer 10 years ago. He didn't blame her. Who could wait for a man sending letters from a place where every day might be his last? So for Walter, post-war life boiled down to 3 things: a wooden house on the hill, a wooden boat at the dock, and the ocean ahead. Every morning, he left the house at 4:30 a.m., bringing with him a thermos of coffee, a thin blanket, and a box of crackers for the seagulls who had grown familiar with him. Every time the boat departed, he hung an American flag at the bow. No one told him to, and no one really noticed. But to Walter, raising the flag was a ritual. Not just to show patriotic pride, but to remind himself, "I'm still here. I haven't disappeared." He caught a few crabs each day, not to sell, but to bring to the community kitchen at the church down the street. The homeless people there called him Captain Walt, perhaps the only person they respected not because of money, but because of how he treated the sea and them. On clear nights, he slept aboard the boat. No lights, no TV, only the sound of waves and the creak of wood as the wind slipped through. Mason once asked, "Aren't you scared being out there alone?" Walter gave a soft, gravelly laugh. "On land is where I feel lost. Out at sea, I remember who I am." People in Seaford had grown so used to that image, no one questioned it anymore. A few younger ones mocked him behind his back, calling him Ghost Sailor. But no one dared approach when he looked directly at them, the same stare that once froze new recruits on the USS Anchorage in place. And so time passed. An old soldier living in silence, in memory, a ragged boat cutting waves each day, a town transforming, where the past seemed to have no anchor left. But what no one in town, and not even Walter himself, could have foreseen was that a single collision, a moment of arrogance from someone who knew nothing of the sea, would shatter everything he had protected for 40 years, and that the ocean itself, the silent witness all these years, would be the first to speak. A soldier never stops serving. It's just that later, they serve by the way they live. That morning, the air was crisp and cool, with thick fog blanketing the waters of Seaford Bay like a thin veil concealing all motion. As usual, Walter Grayson left his house before dawn. His hands, calloused by the years, moved deftly, untying each rope with the care of someone tending to something sacred. He had just reached the area near the mouth of the bay, what he always called the most beautiful view of the new day, when he heard a low engine rumble in the distance. It wasn't the sound of a fishing skiff, nor the familiar hum of a cargo boat. This sound was different, heavy, arrogant. He looked up. Emerging from the fog, a massive white structure appeared like a floating fortress, gleaming with metallic sheen, parting the water like a blade through silk. Its name was painted in gold-plated lettering on the stern: Astra Fortuna. From the uppermost deck came laughter. A group of people dressed as if they had just walked off a fashion runway were clinking glasses and dancing, indifferent to time, place, or passage. Damian Cross, 38, CEO of Cross Tech and one of the wealthiest men on the West Coast, stood at the center holding a champagne flute, his smile halfway between mockery and smug self satisfaction. Walter quickly raised his arm, waving frantically, shouting, "Hey, small boat ahead, I'm right here." No one heard, no one cared. The EDM music blasting from the yacht's sound system drowned even the wind. The harbor security team nearby saw what was happening but remained silent. Who would dare stop Damian Cross? The man who funded the entire redevelopment of Seaford Bay. The man the mayor called the patron of this land. Walter shouted again, no longer a warning but a cry of desperation. But it was too late. Boom! The sound cracked through the air, echoing in every chest that witnessed it. The stern of the Liberty Bell exploded like a wooden balloon, splintering into countless fragments. The scent of burning wood, old paint, and salt water mixed into a bitter, acrid blend. Walter managed to leap onto the dock just before his boat sank. His back slammed into the wood, his head spinning. But what kept him from rising wasn't the pain. It was the sight of the American flag he had raised every day for 40 years, swept away by the waves, torn to shreds, stained crimson on one side by seawater and ship paint. From the towering deck above, Damian Cross looked down, frowning with irritation. What the hell is that old wreck doing in the middle of the harbor? Then he turned away, shrugging at his girlfriend. Just an old fishing tub. Get over it. A tourist captured the scene on video and posted it online with the title, "Old Man's Boat Gets Owned by a Billionaire's Yacht, LOL." Within an hour, the video hit over 200,000 views. The comments were flooded with lines like, "Who even uses wooden boats anymore? Boomers need to learn when to retire. Old man's boat was in the way, serves him right." No one helped him up. No one asked if he was hurt. Walter slowly stepped toward the water's edge, reached out, and pulled the soaked flag to his chest. His eyes held no rage, no plea, only a chilling emptiness. A harbor official approached, speaking hesitantly. "Mr. Grayson, I'll have to file a report, but, it's complicated." Walter didn't respond. He simply bowed his head, hands trembling as he pressed the flag to his chest, then turned away. His back was still straight, his steps still steady. But anyone who looked could see his heart had just broken with a sound no one could hear. That night, people saw him sitting on the dock well past midnight, not crying, not complaining, just silently gazing at the water as if searching for something lost. A few people walked past, no one stopped. They didn't know that with that collision, what was lost wasn't just a boat. It was a living artifact of the past, a quiet belief that in this place honor was still upheld. And even more, they couldn't have known that by tomorrow, the ocean would answer, and it would not be gentle. The next morning, there was no fog. Seaford Bay was bathed in sunlight. The sea was calm, the breeze light. It was far too peaceful a day to imagine that less than 24 hours earlier, in this very spot, a boat had been crushed and a man had lost the sanctuary that had held his entire life. But the town went on as if nothing had happened. Cafes opened on schedule. Luxury jeeps lined up down the street with tourists. On the corner, a group of young people were rewatching the now viral clip. Damian Cross tilting his chin downward and muttering, "Old fishing tub, get over it." They laughed, scrolled past, typed a comment. Savage move, bro. Meanwhile, Walter Grayson sat in his wooden house on the hillside, a cup of cold coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the bay. Not to search for the Liberty Bell, he knew it had dissolved into the water, but to try convincing his heart that it was somehow acceptable that no one had seen it happen. That afternoon, he opened the old chest tucked in the corner of the room. Inside, everything was still meticulously arranged. A photo with crewmates aboard the USS Anchorage, a handwritten letter from his commanding officer, a frayed piece of life netting, a silver name tag worn around his neck for 20 years of service. And at the very bottom, folded with ceremonial precision, was an intact American flag, presented to him at his discharge ceremony. He gently smoothed its edges, eyes lost in memory. "Are you going to sue him? He destroyed your boat. He should pay for that." It was Mason, his grandson, home from the Naval Academy for the holidays, standing at the doorway, eyes ablaze with youthful fury. Walter shook his head, his voice hoarse but steady. "He didn't ram into me. He rammed into something no one ever thought mattered." "But you built that boat with your own hands. It was your life." Mason shouted. To me, yes, but to them it was just a shabby wooden shell, an eyesore in their perfect picture of Seaford Bay tourism, he replied. That night, unable to sleep, Walter opened his maritime journal, a log he'd kept for 40 years. On the last page, he wrote, Day 1 without Liberty Bell. No one asked, no one mourned, but the sea still calls, as if nothing had broken. He closed the book, placed it in a tin box, then quietly turned on the TV. The local news read, The Astra Fortuna Yacht, Seaford Bay's new symbol of prosperity, has officially docked. Locals flock to see the largest super yacht ever anchored here. Not a single line about the collision. No mention of the shattered wooden boat. No remembrance of the old sailor clutching a flag in freezing water. The next afternoon, a call came from the harbor office. The man's tone was professional to the point of indifference. Mr. Grayson, after reviewing the file, we confirm that your vessel did not have the updated reflective radar system or an active navigation beacon. Unfortunately, the insurance cannot cover this incident. Walter replied quietly, I haven't missed a single inspection in 40 years. Yes, we're aware, but the laws have changed, and your vessel no longer exists for us to reassess. The voice on the other end trailed off. Walter didn't argue, he didn't beg. He simply hung up the phone, then walked out to the porch, eyes on the sea. What Damien Cross destroyed wasn't just a boat. It was the only place on Earth where Walter still felt like a soldier, still felt like he was serving, still felt like he mattered. That night, he took the discharge flag and hung it on the front porch. The sea wind blew strong, making the fabric flutter like the breath of someone struggling to rise again. Don't blame them. They don't understand, he whispered. Not to anyone in particular. Perhaps to himself. Perhaps to the fallen ones he once promised he'd never let be forgotten. But then, just when Seaford Bay thought the story was over the next morning, the ocean was no longer silent. That morning, Seaford Bay was veiled in fog once again. A thick mist blanketed the bay, swallowing the morning light. The air was still, rendering the surface of the water like frosted glass, motionless and hushed. Walter Grayson sat on the old wooden chair out on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He didn't look at the cup. He no longer had the habit of drinking it all. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the bay, the place he had stood the day before, where the Liberty Bell was shattered 2 days ago, where everything had once been home. At exactly 7 a.m., a foghorn blasted, shrill and piercing, 3 long blasts in succession, ripping through the silence. The people of Seaford startled, not because of the sound, but because it was not the usual signal. Walter froze. Something in his mind, some long-dormant military reflex, sprang to life. Those 3 blasts, in Navy protocol, were only issued when a formation of warships entered domestic waters for ceremonial honors or high alert protocol. He stood up, hand-gripping the porch railing, his seasoned eyes narrowing toward the fog-shrouded sea. One by one, gray silhouettes began to emerge, blurry at first, then sharper. 1, 2, 3, then 6 naval ships, all slicing through the bay in perfect unison, inch by inch. No sirens, no announcements, only the American flag fluttering at half-mast on every deck. The townspeople began pouring into the harbor. Early opening shops slammed their doors shut. Children in summer programs were rushed home by anxious parents. The entire town seemed pulled into a moment of ceremony, unaware of the history they were about to witness. At the center of the formation, the USS Winston led the way straight into the main harbor. As it docked, a unit of Marines lined up in a formal honor guard. From the upper deck descended Rear Admiral Jonathan Vale, dressed in crisp white uniform, his face chiseled and composed, calm, solemn, untouchable. In his hands was a neatly folded triangle, an American flag, stars facing upward, each edge precisely creased in the number of folds prescribed by military funeral rites. Walter stood on his porch, heart pounding like a drum. No one had called his name. No letter had been sent. But he knew, instinctively, that flag was meant for him. He made his way down the hill slowly, wearing a faded thick cotton shirt and the same old military boots bearing the scuff marks of command. The crowd parted for him without being told. There was something in his eyes, in his gait, that made everyone feel they stood before someone who bore witness to something far greater than wealth, media, or the present day. As he reached the harbor, Admiral Vale approached, raising his hand in a precise salute. Chief Petty Officer Grayson, requesting permission to step ashore and conduct honors. Walter returned the salute, a gesture he thought he'd long forgotten, but today his body remembered for him. "Permission granted, Admiral," he replied, voice firm and steady as ever. The entire Navy formation turned, standing at attention, eyes fixed on the shore. Admiral Vale did not speak to Walter alone, but addressed the crowd directly, his voice ringing like a bronze bell. 43 years ago, a breach occurred on the USS Anchorage. A cooling valve ruptured during a storm in the South China Sea. One sailor braved the compartment, manually shut the valve, and suffered burns over 60% of his body to stop toxic gas from reaching the sleeping quarters, where 128 young sailors lay unaware. He declined the Navy Cross, declined all honors, left behind only one request: take care of the ones who didn't make it back. A soft breeze stirred. For the first time, some townspeople looked at Walter with a different gaze, one of belated understanding. Yesterday, his boat, the Liberty Belle, was destroyed in this bay amid indifference and silence. The flag he raised for 40 years was left to sink beneath the waves. No one stood up, but the Navy has not forgotten one of its own. A young sailor stepped forward and handed Walter a bronze plaque salvaged from a decommissioned warship. It read, "To the man who kept the sea safe even after his service ended." Finally, Admiral Vale bowed his head, speaking not as a commander, but as a man offering a heartfelt apology. "You were not just a soldier. You are a symbol, and today, honor returns to the place where it was once lost." Seaford Bay fell completely silent. No voices, no phones raised. Only hands lifted in salute for the first time, not out of duty, but out of genuine gratitude. The image of 6 U.S. Navy warships simultaneously flying flags at half-mast in Seaford Bay sent shockwaves across the nation. Within just 30 minutes after the ceremony ended, the live stream spread like wildfire across social media. The hashtag Salute Grayson surged to the top of trending charts within an hour, completely replacing earlier mockery-laden tags like hashtag Boomer Boat Fail and hashtag Old Man Down. In less than a day, everything around Damien Cross began to crack. By the next morning, national media had officially picked up the story. Not because of the multi-million-dollar yacht, but because of the questions no one had thought to ask before. How does a boat get rammed and sunk in the middle of a bay with no one held accountable? Why was a war veteran so utterly ignored in the very town he once lived in and served? Then came the first blow. A leaked internal recording released by a former employee of Damien Cross's PR team. In the recording, Damien can be heard laughing raucously after the collision, his tone dripping with arrogance. "It was just a rotten old shell. Bet it didn't even have Wi-Fi. These old-timers need to get out of the way for the new age." That voice, once a source of confidence for investors and admiration for journalists, now stood as irrefutable evidence of bone-deep indifference. The outrage spread like wildfire. The American Veterans Federation issued a statement demanding an official investigation, alongside a long list of powerful figures who had funded Crosstech. A spontaneous protest erupted outside Crosstech's San Francisco headquarters, with banners reading, "A billionaire sunk a boat but drowned our respect." CNN aired the full Navy ceremony in Seaford Bay under the headline, "Honor Resurfaced." So did the truth. Within 48 hours, venture capital firms began pulling out. Crosstech stock plummeted 23% in early trading. The company's website was temporarily shut down due to overwhelming traffic and waves of online protest spam. But the final blow came on day 3. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, announced an investigation into financial misconduct surrounding Damien's coastal land acquisitions, deals marketed under the banner of "reviving the town." Simultaneously, the Oregon Senator's office received a petition with over 2 million signatures, demanding a full disclosure of those who had politically and financially backed the tech mogul, especially in projects with political ties, plunging the local government into a crisis of public trust. That evening, Damien Cross appeared on national television in a carefully staged interview. His eyes were red, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, no tie, sitting across from a renowned anchor with a face weary as if just stepped out of a courtroom. He bowed his head. "I was wrong. I have no excuse. I didn't understand the value of an old boat. I didn't understand that some things can't be replaced by money." The anchor asked, "Have you apologized to Mr. Walter Grayson yet?" Damien fell silent. His eyes blinked once. I will go see him, but I don't believe I deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, in Seaford Bay, Walter sat on his porch as always, eyes gazing out toward the water. The media had packed up. The noise had quieted, but he knew something had changed forever. People often don't recognize the worth of a soul until the simplest things are shattered. And sometimes justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand still and wait for the world to realign. Damien Cross didn't just sink a boat, he sank the illusion that honor could be outpaced by power and wealth. 3 days after the Navy's tribute, as public outrage still simmered and Damien Cross's name became the center of every ethical debate across national media, a black SUV quietly pulled up at the entrance of Seaford Bay. No motorcade, no bodyguards, no reporters. Damien Cross stepped out alone. He wore a simple ash gray sweater and khaki pants. His hair, once slicked back for Forbes covers, now fell loosely. In his hand was a plain envelope, his fingers gripping it so tightly they had turned white. Walter Grayson was sitting by the small wooden dock near where the Liberty Bell had once been moored. The chair he sat on was borrowed from the church, worn and old, but sturdier than its appearance. As every morning, he sat in silence, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes distant, watching the horizon where the sea met the sky. Damien approached, stopping a few paces away like a stranger unsure of how to begin. "Mr. Grayson," he started, then fell silent. Walter didn't turn. He simply spoke, his voice steady. "I'm alive, but my boat isn't. If you came to ask if I'm okay, don't bother." Damien swallowed hard, then stepped forward, extending the envelope. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want to make things right. This is a blank check. Whatever you think is fair, whatever you believe it's worth." Only then did Walter turn his head. His gaze wasn't angry, nor cold, just empty, like the sea when the wind disappears. "You think money can buy back 40 years? You think I need you to put a price on something you didn't even look at when you destroyed it?" Damien froze. A man used to controlling rooms, spinning narratives, swaying investors, now stood before a silver-haired veteran, unsure what to do with the hands he still held out. Walter turned fully to face him. "You don't need to repay me with money. I don't need you to replace the boat. But if you truly want to do something, make this town remember. Remember that there was once a boat named Liberty Bell, that there was once a soldier who lived quietly here, and that some things are lost simply because no one listened in time." Damien nodded, whispering like an exhale. "What do you want me to do?" Walter pointed toward the far end of the dock where the boat had once been moored. "Place a bench there. Real wood. No varnish. No polish. Just sturdy, like what time taught me to be. And carve 3 words into it. Just 3. Simple. Sit. Remember. Thank." 2 days later, a woodworker from Seattle arrived at Seaford Bay, bringing a precious slab of teak wood that had been ordered in advance. People were surprised to see Damien Cross show up at the site, wearing an old shirt, holding a hammer, pulling nails, and assembling the bench frame alongside the workers. Each strike of the hammer was a wordless apology. Each lift of the wood a part of his ego being stripped away. No press, no live stream, no speech. He just worked. When the bench was completed, the 3 words engraved on a modest brass plate read, "Sit, remember, thank." A new American flag stood beside it. No fanfare, no banners, just a small group of Seaford residents, the same ones who once laughed when the old man's boat was wrecked, now came just to sit quietly for 5 minutes, then rose just as quietly. On social media, the news spread fast. Billionaire refuses to pay with money, builds memorial bench for veteran after outrage. Veteran doesn't sue, asks for 3 words that made America pause. One post in particular touched millions. They sank the boat, but they couldn't sink the soul that guarded the sea. That evening, Walter sat alone on the new bench, watching the ripples of sunset shimmer across the water. Damien Cross walked up, said nothing, stood beside him for a few minutes, then walked away. No one knows what words were exchanged between them, if any, whether forgiveness was given. But from that day on, Damien Cross was no longer hated, not quite loved, just, finally, a man who had learned how to bow his head. 1 week had passed since the bench was completed. Seaford Bay was quieter than usual, not the kind of quiet that comes with forgetting, but the kind that invites remembrance. Walter Grayson kept to his old routine, waking before dawn, sitting by the wooden dock, holding a cup of cold coffee. But instead of looking out to the spot where Liberty Bell once rested, he often paused at the newly placed bench, where the three words, sit, remember, thank, whispered to him each morning like a gentle refrain. One afternoon, just as the sun began casting pale amber light across the bay, a distant engine hummed through the stillness. Not loud, but distinct, the kind of sound only someone who'd spent a lifetime at sea would recognize. Walter looked up, eyes narrowing. From the middle of the bay, a small boat was being towed in. Wooden hull, sleek shape, a gently curved bow like the sea's old familiar smile. Along the side, fresh paint caught the evening sun, making the newly painted name shimmer like silver. Liberty's Echo. Walter shot to his feet, a current of electricity coursing through his chest. On the deck stood Mason, his grandson, at the helm, face beaming like the little boy who once sat on his lap learning to tie ropes. Behind him stood a group, mostly veterans, boat builders, a few Seaford locals, all in simple shirts, backs damp with sweat, but eyes alight like they had just built something not meant for this era of shiny coatings and glass decks. Mason called out through the wind, "Surprise, Grandpa! We found your original blueprints in the attic!" Walter didn't speak. His throat locked up. His hand gripped the dock's edge as if to keep from collapsing. We called the National Boat Builders Guild. A group of veterans from the East Coast flew in. Mr. Deacon's supply store donated the wood, and Uncle Tony, the one you rescued offshore back in '84, built the frame in just 3 days. Liberty's Echo was moored and docked. Walter walked forward like a man waking from a dream. Every sound around him faded, except for the soft thump of hull meeting pier, the tightening rope, the wind turning a page in time. He laid a hand on the railing, not a gesture of nostalgia, but as if touching something alive again. Right here, right now. "It's not exactly the Liberty Bell," Mason said quietly, stepping beside him. "We added a new radar system and satellite navigation, but its soul, that's still yours. Every plank's been laid the way you once did." Walter smiled, not wide, but the lines around his eyes softened like waves settling after a long storm. "My hands didn't build it, but my heart, it's still here." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the last light clung to the bay, Walter sat aboard Liberty's Echo, holding a new flag still scented with fresh fabric. He raised it with his own hands, fastening it to the mast. The flag billowed in the wind, not as a declaration of ownership nor a symbol of pride, but as a greeting. To the past, to those who had gone, and to himself, the man who once nearly lost who he was in the chaos of the world. Down at the dock, the people of Seaford stood watching. Some eyes shimmered, some placed hands over hearts. And at the end of the pier, the bench bearing the words, "Sit, remember, thank," was no longer a symbol of redemption, but a doorway into the goodness we carry, if only we stop long enough to remember and to give thanks. Walter Grayson didn't reclaim justice through courtrooms. He didn't rebuild the past with money or rage. He simply stood still, and the sea gave everything back. That morning, Seaford Bay seemed a little brighter than usual. The surface of the water shimmered with early silver light, and the sky was clear, untouched by clouds. On the wooden bench etched with the words, "Sit, remember, thank," Walter Grayson sat as always. But instead of holding his usual cup of cold coffee, today he held a single sheet of paper, eyes scanning its lines as though testing the weight of an old belief. It was an official letter from the National Youth Maritime Program. The sender, none other than Rear Admiral Jonathan Vail, the man who had once saluted Walter amid a formation of honor and stood silently with the rest of America not long ago. "Walter, we are expanding our youth naval training program in the Pacific Northwest. We don't need instructors fluent in theory. We need someone who understands the sea and understands how a man can find himself again in the waves. If you're willing, the program is yours." Walter folded the letter. He didn't need time to think. He was old, but he had never been useless. 2 weeks later, at the East Dock, once the mooring site of the Liberty Bell, a new stone plaque was installed. Not large, not ornate, it bore a simple line, "Liberty Bell, a boat that carried more than one soul." And below it, etched deeper, as if daring time to erase it, he did not demand justice. He just picked up the torn flag and walked away. The arrival of Liberty's Echo was more than just the return of a boat. It was the return of a way of living, without complaint, without hate, without spectacle, simply living by one's values until life itself bows its head to such quiet strength. Since the new boat was launched, Walter no longer fished like before. He didn't need to work anymore, and no one would let him. He became a storyteller, a teacher of knots and wind directions, and most importantly, a teacher of what it meant to be decent. One afternoon, as Walter taught a group of teens how to fold the flag according to military code, a 7-year-old girl named Lily, curious and always full of questions, suddenly asked in a whisper, "Mr. Walter, are you mad at the man who broke your boat?" Silence lingered for a few seconds. Walter's hands slowed as he folded the fabric. Then he looked at the children, their faces waiting intently for his answer. "No," he said calmly, "because if that hadn't happened, none of you would know the boat ever existed." The kids nodded. They didn't ask more, but in their eyes something had taken root, a simple understanding that adults often forget. Honor doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be lived and witnessed. That summer, Seaford Bay welcomed a record number of visitors, but unlike previous years, they didn't come just to see the billionaire's yacht. They came to sit on that wooden bench, to read the story engraved in brass, and to quietly bow their heads. They left handwritten notes. Letters. Some just sat, placing a hand on the bench, as if apologizing on behalf of someone who forgot to bow. By late September, Damien Cross returned to Seaford Bay. No cameras. No aides. He sat silently beside Walter on the bench. Neither spoke. A gentle breeze stirred, and the flag on Liberty's Echo still danced in the wind. After a while, Damien finally said, "I lost the company. The name. Everything I used to think mattered." Walter didn't look over, just gave a slight nod, then replied slowly, "And what's left?" Damien looked toward the sea, his fingers curling. "A name no one believes anymore. A building under new ownership. A few sleepless nights." Walter shrugged faintly. "Good. Those are the things you need to start over." As the sun set over the bay, casting amber light across the water, Walter stood. He placed a hand on Damien's shoulder and spoke for the first time in a voice soft but clear as an order. "You don't need forgiveness. You need to do what's right." Then he stepped aboard Liberty's Echo, guiding the wheel through the waves as if there had never been a crack in his soul. Steady, quiet, just like the life he'd lived for 40 unseen years, and now one the world could no longer look away from. Walter Grayson didn't have a bronze statue, no medals hung in a museum, but he had what every man hopes for at the end of a life: a bench carved with 3 words, a boat that gave hope, and a town finally learning to bow before the man who had always deserved their respect.